Hello, everyone, and welcome to another LSATMax presentation. My name is Brandon. I'm an instructor with LSATMax. I took the LSAT many, many years ago, got a 175, went to UCLA School of Law, practiced law for a few years. Now I teach the LSAT and bar exam preparation. And today, what we are going to talk about is something that is very important to LSAT preparation and a lot of other things in life. But that doesn't get a lot of coverage and usually gets no coverage in classes where you study for the LSAT. So today we're going to be talking about managing stress and anxiety when studying for this exam and also when studying for other exams or even when having other stressful periods in your life. I have a few announcements to make before we get started, but I would just like to say this, which is all of our presentations, we invite participation. And this one especially so, because what I'm going to be doing is talking about some strategies for managing stress and anxiety, but everybody has different needs. Everybody manages stress and anxiety differently. And so what I'm really hoping is that in addition to the information that I'm providing, that you guys will provide your own experiences. And so you can do that in a couple of ways as this presentation progresses. You can raise your hand in the participants box, and I can call on you and you can talk to everybody just like I'm talking to everyone. You can put comments in the chat box, although when a presentation gets big, the chat box sometimes goes by too fast for me to keep an eye on it. So I may not catch that. But you can also put questions that you're okay with me answering at the end or suggestions that you're okay with me talking about at the end into the Q&A box. And I will definitely go through those when we're done with today's presentation. But like I said, please participate. Please offer your strategies for coping with stress and anxiety and all of your colleagues on here, and I will appreciate it. So in just a moment, we will get started, but let me just make a few announcements. Another announcement I would like to make is one that I've made a couple of times. So if you've been to one of these presentations, you may be familiar with this, but it is something that we're really excited about and we're still working on it, which is our Justice in Action initiative. And for those of you who do not know, the Justice in Action initiative is something that LSATMax, and there's a link in the chat box. So go ahead and click on that. And you can have a look at the Justice in Action initiative. And what it is each year for the next 5 years, TestMax is selecting 200 students to become fellows in our Justice in Action initiative. And what happens when you are a fellow in the Justice in Action initiative is a couple of things. First of all, we're going to do our best to help get you to and through law school. And we're going to do that in a bunch of different ways. So the Justice in Action initiative, if you are selected to be a participant, you'll get a free LSATMax course to help you study for the LSAT. You'll get free application assistance for obviously applying to law schools. You'll get our first year law school course free, which I think is really excellent because the first year of law school can be really intimidating and disorienting. And so if you have that as a backup to the information you're getting in your classes, I think it's really useful. We'll also provide you with a free Barmax course. Barmax is our bar preparation course, and also job placement assistant toward the end of law school. And so really it's kind of like a beginning to end program that will help you, like I said, to and through law school. And the idea behind it is that we're trying to create a community of lawyers who want to use their legal education to fight for justice and equality. And so if that's something that you feel like lines up with your experience and your goals as a law student and a lawyer, I strongly suggest that you apply. When you get to that link, what you'll find is that there are a couple of short essay questions. And really what we're just asking you to tell us about is what is your history with promoting justice and equality, and what are your plans going forward to continue doing that? So I see a hand already. Tatiana, do you have a question? You can unmute yourself if you do.
So you just want to say, so I apologize, but I just want to say, you are awesome. I love I love all of these meetings. It's amazing how your company does these and are free. I apologize to interrupt. I just wanted to say that and just say thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for your kind words, Tatiana. I appreciate it. And I really hope that we are able to provide you with value in these presentations. So thank you for showing.
Always do. Yes,
All
always
right.
do.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Awesome. Uh-oh. Okay. I think I'm not echoing anymore. All right. So let us continue with the show. So I think I have gotten the announcements out of the way. So let's start talking about what we were going to talk about. So yes, I got the Justice in Action initiative out of the way. So let's get started. Let me share my screen with you. All right, somebody, let me see. Okay, that's better. Here it is. All right. So let's talk about coping with stress and anxiety while studying for the LSAT. Like I was saying, everybody is different in terms of how they cope with stress or what works with them for coping with stress. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my understanding of stress and anxiety, maybe a little bit about how I manage or maybe failed to manage sometimes my stress and anxiety, studying for the LSAT, studying for the bar exam. And then I will definitely open it up and we can all have a conversation about how we do it. So the first thing I want to say is that, and this may seem silly, but sometimes people don't necessarily know what they are feeling. Sometimes people are stressed, and sometimes that stress is affecting your performance, and especially with something high stakes like studying for the LSAT, it can affect your performance, and you don't really realize what is going on because there are feelings that you might have, and you might not recognize that those feelings are signs of stress. So I'm assuming a lot of us showed up here because we know that we have stress, and we know that we need help with it. So this may not be an analysis that you need to do, but there can be signs of stress that you may not be paying attention to. And what I want to say more broadly, and what I think is going to be like the theme that kind of covers this presentation, is a theme of mindfulness, a theme of being present and observing what's going on, both within ourselves and what's going on with our situation and the people around us. And really like taking those cues and being aware of them, because it's very easy to get just lost in studying for the LSAT. So here, if you do not know that you are stressed out, or if things have changed for you, this is a non-exhaustive list of things that may indicate that you need to take some affirmative steps to address your stress and or anxiety. So you may have noticed if you were studying for the LSAT hard for months and months that you come to a point where you just kind of don't want to do it anymore. And so burnout, yes, is a real thing, and burnout should be taken care of. An avoidant behavior, avoiding things, especially if they were things that you did not avoid before, can be a sign that something has changed with you. So if you feel like you're avoiding things either that gave you pleasure before or avoiding things that you know need to be taken care of, that might be a sign of stress or anxiety. Difficulty concentrating or making decisions. Again, all of this stuff can be kind of filed under burnout, but it is important to deal with. Burnout is stress. Burnout has to do with anxiety. Fear of failure. I know a lot of us have this fear of failure thing, especially with something like the LSAT. It's important for your future. And so, you know, you feel like the stakes are high, and the stakes in some ways are high. Although I think generally people tend to think the stakes with the LSAT are a little bit higher than they really are, especially when you're in the middle of it. That kind of thing can get in the way of your performance and in the way of studying. Any negative thoughts and feelings are going to get in the way of your performance. And in fact, the only thoughts and feelings that are helpful are the ones that keep you in the moment. But there are also oftentimes physical symptoms of anxiety when you don't even know that you're stressed or anxious. Again, if any of these arise, you might want to think about what you can do to manage them. Sweating, shaking, dry mouth, physical discomfort, sleeping. I know that's a big one for a lot of us. When you're stressed out, it can be very hard to turn your mind off and to get back into things. Eating issues as well. Some people, like I know I do this sometimes when I get stressed out, I eat to self-soothe. I eat to comfort myself. And then when I get really stressed out, I stop eating. And so both of those are obviously unhealthy compared to eating right, eating a good diet, and eating a healthy amount. And so any one of these things, if you are seeing it, could be a symptom of anxiety, could be a symptom of stress. And again, to maximize your performance on the LSAT, if you're concerned not about yourself, but nothing else than your performance, dealing with stress and anxiety is important for those performance issues. So, like I said, most of us, I think, are here because we've already figured out that we have stress and anxiety, so we don't necessarily need a diagnosis. But on the next page, I have a very long and yet non-exhaustive list of stuff that you can do to address stress and anxiety. And so I'm not necessarily going to talk through each one of these, but I am going to pick out a few and talk about why I think they're important and how especially they relate to studying for the LSAT. So once you have identified that your stress and anxiety are things that need to be taken care of, these are some things you can do. First of all, and obviously most importantly, you should listen to the most recently dropped episode of the Legal Level podcast. I believe we dropped this episode just yesterday. So in addition to doing this, I also host a podcast for TestMax. If you have not had a chance, and look, a link showed up in the chat for you to go check it out right this moment. I host a podcast with another instructor from LSATMax. Her name is Yelena. She is very brilliant. She is a games genius, where I struggled with games a little bit. But we had a very lengthy conversation with a woman by the name of Heather Preet. She is a mindfulness expert at UCLA. So she works at their, I can't remember the name of it right now. It's MAPS Mindfulness Application Program, something like that. I know I'm getting it wrong. But she gave some really awesome tips about managing stress, and not just kind of generalized tips, but she gave tips for managing stress in certain instances. She gave tips that are particular to studying. She also gave tips, and this will be helpful for some of you, specifically for people who are trying to manage study tests in the face of struggling with ADHD and also autism spectrum disorder. So she's an expert, she's a professional on this stuff. I would strongly suggest that you go and listen to that podcast. It was a really great conversation. Yes, and that's number one. There are some other things that are important. So what she talked about, and what I would like to kind of hopefully focus on today, and I know this is kind of a similar thing, but to develop a meditation practice. And I think that second part is the important part, which is the practice part of it. I know I have, had waves in my life where sometimes I've had a meditation practice and I've stuck with it and I felt like it's been really helpful. But there have also been times when I've had a meditation, or when I haven't had a meditation practice, or when I've tried to keep up with one, and it's hard to do so. And so my understanding, or what she was talking about, is that if you develop a practice, meditation works in two ways. It can work in the moment to help calm you down when you are having, a stress or an anxiety attack or something like that. And so that's kind of a one-off thing, using it like a rescue inhaler for asthma, but it also works over time. So if you have a meditation practice, it makes changes in your brain. And I don't know that those changes are permanent, and I forget exactly what the center of the brain is, but Heather talked about this. But basically what you're doing is you're developing the muscles necessary to remain calm and focused under pressure. And it's just like anything else. You don't go lift weights once and then, you're in great shape. You have to do it regularly. And so the idea, and I'm going to talk about this specifically in terms of addressing LSAT questions, but the idea is to get to the point where you are able to keep yourself focused on what's going on in front of you in the moment, regardless of what stresses you come up against. And that is very important on the LSAT, but the idea is to have a practice. And I think she said those changes in the brain take about 6 weeks for having a regular meditation practice. So I think that's a great idea to do now. Now, I know, and this was the deal for me, and it's the deal for a lot of people, that the kind of standard traditional meditating can be a little bit difficult, especially if you're doing it on your own. That's where you sit down, you close your eyes, you focus on your breathing, et cetera, et cetera. And especially a lot of us are kind of, we're all you guys are training to be lawyers. I am a lawyer. And so we're, kind of aggressive go-getter people. And so for a lot of us, just sitting still and trying to quiet our mind can be difficult. And so what I talked to Heather about on that podcast, and I'm happy to talk about it now as well, is I actually for a while was going to group meditations, and they weren't always just sitting meditations. So there were food meditations and walking meditations. And the idea behind it is that you are bringing mindfulness to the activities in your daily life. And so just know, and I think some of the stuff I'll talk about a little bit later will give you some information on this. There are multiple modalities of meditation. It does not just have to be sitting cross-legged, breathing in, breathing out, which I know can be difficult for some of us. That brings me to the kind of broader idea behind it, which is being mindful. And again, like I said, I want this to be the theme of today's presentation, being mindful, being in the moment, focusing on what is in front of us. And you can do that anytime, no matter what you are doing. And it's just where instead of thinking about, oh my God, I should be studying, or I screwed up on my last practice exam, instead what you're doing is you are very much focused on what's going on in front of you. You can wash dishes mindfully. You can vacuum the carpet mindfully. You can go to the park mindfully. Any of those things. And what you're training yourself to do in living mindfully is to focus on what's in front of you. And that's incredibly, incredibly important for test taking. It's important for life, but it's incredibly important for test taking. So those are the really like foundational things that I strongly recommend to everybody. But some of these other things I think will work for some people and will not work for others. And so let me just talk about a few of them, at least the ones that I tried and that were important for my studies. And then when I get done with some of these, I'm going to open it up and ask you guys to let me know what you do that helps keep you calm, that helps keep you mindful and in the moment. So I found a lot, and it's a little bit more difficult now, but I found that studying in a new place was a great way to help me with burnout. So I would study in the same place over and over again. And then if I was getting, I got close to test day, Yoli is asking, and I have lots of this that we're going to get to, how would you apply this to be able to read mindfully? You are going to be so excited. Stay in the moment with active reading, logical reasoning. I'm going to tell you how to do that. I'm going to tell you how to do it on logic games. And I'm going to tell you how to do it with reading comprehension. So we will definitely answer those questions. I will just answer the hell out of them very soon. But let's get there. Yeah, so I would go study in a new place. And I know that's hard with COVID-19, especially if you live in a city that's locked down or something like that. But that can get you that kind of rest or change of scenery when you're burned out. And especially if it's, we're getting close to test day, it's hard to take a day or 2 or 3 off that you might need to work through that burnout. But I do think changing up scenery can be helpful. When I studied for the LSAT, it was all of my homework was in books, so I could just go anywhere. I'd go to the beach, I'd go to a park to study, I'd go to a coffee shop. With LSATMax, you can take your studies with you anywhere with your phone, so you can go elsewhere to do that. So I think that's important. Let me just pick a few other things that I think are important. Again, I'm not going to talk about every single one of these, but if you want to talk about some of them, we certainly can. Here's one that I think is really important. There are people that will help you along your journey. There are people who are neither helping nor hindering your journey. Those people are all fine. And then there are people who are actively in the way of your journey. Those people, if they cannot help or at least get out of the way of your journey, then they should not be in your lives. And if somebody popped into your mind as I said this, dump toxic people, and you're thinking, maybe that person fits that definition, that person probably fits that definition. Studying for the LSAT is difficult, it's stressful, people can add to that stress. Paloma says, I'm a people pleaser and this is hard. I understand, Paloma, just give me the phone number of the person who needs to go and we'll take care of it. No, I'm just kidding. This is what ghosting was made for. No, I'm just kidding. But yes, dumping toxic people. And again, a lot of this advice is not just LSAT advice, it's life. So I think that's important. I think this one is also really important and helpful. You guys are here and you're typing into the chat box. So you guys are already, communicating with each other a little bit, but you do not, even in the middle of a pandemic, have to study alone. You can create a study group. You can join a study group. I don't know how many of you are on Facebook, but there are Facebook groups of people studying for the LSAT. And just like we're using Zoom right now to study together, you can use video chatting software, Zoom or something else, in order to study together with people. It can be helpful to do questions together to talk through stuff, but it can also be helpful just to be studying in the presence of each other. And Chelsea is offering to study with people, so take up Chelsea on her offer. So I think that's helpful. Again, when you're trying to get rid of burnout, sometimes you can't just take time off, but if you can rearrange the space that you're in, especially your study space, then sometimes you can get a fresh look on things. And I think that can be helpful. This next one, there is a reason I put create a study schedule or don't, because there are two options. One is that having that structure of a study schedule is going to be a relief for you. And if that's the case, having the structure of a study schedule is something that you should have. So at LSATMax, we will give you a study schedule to start out with. You can adapt it to your own needs. But I put down or don't, because for a lot of people, having that kind of rigid study schedule may impose its own stress. So again, everybody is different. So make sure you do what works for you. Everybody says exercise. I'm not going to talk about that. That's what everybody says. It is helpful though. So I guess I talked about it. A couple of other things that I think sometimes people don't necessarily do or take for granted. I'm sorry, they're power washing the outside in my apartment right now. I hope you guys can't hear that, but if you can, I apologize. Just keep a log of things, write things down. When you get things out, it can relieve them, even if it does not change things. And so keeping a journal, or just when you feel frustrated, writing down your feelings, I think can be super helpful. The kind of mirror image of getting rid of toxic people is to talk to and spend time with people who will help you along with your journey. This is not something that you should be doing on your own. So is that friends? Is it family? Regardless, you should be surrounding yourself, especially in times like these, with the people who are going to help you get to where you want to be. Reach out to them, have them help you, you help them. It's a win-win situation. On a similar subject as the toxic stuff, learn to say no. This can be hard. People will come in and take your time and want you to work on their problems. Well, under normal circumstances, then yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely helpful to, or it's wonderful to help people with their needs. But you can't always necessarily do that. And especially when you're studying for the LSAT, it's going to take up a lot of your time. So setting boundaries, I think, can be helpful. Just a few other things. Don't let your hobbies slide. If there is a hobby that you have that keeps you in the moment, that keeps you grounded, then keep up with that hobby. Like I personally, I play guitar. I don't do it professionally. I don't write songs. I used to, but it's just something that helps keep me grounded. So I try to keep doing that. But whatever your hobbies are. And then finally, and I know I'm probably not the first person or the 7,000th person who has recommended this, but consider changing your social media usage. Social media is a tool just like anything else. Maybe it brings wonderful people into your life who do helpful things, but maybe it brings toxicity into your life. And so if you find yourself scrolling and becoming enraged by what you're reading, that's probably not going to be helpful. Tabitha has her hand up, so I'm going to allow you to talk. Tabitha, if you want to unmute yourself, go ahead. Tabitha, are you there? I cannot hear you, although I see you are unmuted. So I'm not sure if your mic is working. Okay, I'm gonna have to come back to you. I don't think your mic is working right now, or you're not talking. Okay, but we will come back. So those, I think, are the kind of main things that I think you should be keeping in mind. Again, there are other things on this list. If you want to talk about those other things, I'm happy to do that. But let me open it up now to all of you, which is, and you can talk about something on this list if you want to, or you can tell everybody how you manage stress and anxiety. So feel free to type into the chat box, feel free to raise your hand, and I will call on you if you would like. But what do you do? How do you manage stress? Share with the team. So Eddie says he loves to spend time in his hammock. That sounds awesome. I like that too. Looks like everybody's ignoring me and talking about making a study group. Am I invited? All right. Ifeanyi, I'm going to allow you to talk. I hope I said your name right. Go ahead.
It's Iffy. One question that I had, honestly, was just if I was studying effectively. One thing that I tried to do was I took the statistics of the type of questions that would be on the LSAT, because how I would study before is I would give equal time to all the different sections. But then when I looked up the statistics on how often the questions are numbered, I found that, questions like strengthening and weakening and linear games and group games, they are a lot more common than some other sections. So I think just a lot of my anxiety comes from like, am I getting the most out of what I'm doing? Like, what kind of strategies did you do, to get the score that you did, so that I feel like, okay, not only am I studying, I'm actually improving. That's the thing that really kind of stresses me out, is the whole time that I'm studying, it's like, okay, am I really getting the best out of it? Am I precisely hitting on the types of issues I'm going to see on test day?
That's great. That's great, Iffy. Thank you for the comment. And I think that's a really important point to make, which is, are you prioritizing? Are you prioritizing the high value stuff, the stuff that is going to help you improve? And so as Iffy was pointing out, and let me add to it a little bit, there are some more common and less common question types and things on the LSAT. So when it comes to logical reasoning, the really common question types are errors in reasoning, strengthen, as Iffy was pointing out, strengthen with a necessary premise questions are very, very common. Strengthen with sufficient, weaken, those are also very common, more common than the other ones. And so really having a good idea of what is going to help you see the most improvement in the short term, I think is very, very big. So, and it sounded like Iffy was asking what helped me as I was studying for the exam. And this is a little bit of a, I don't know that it's stress management, but it is in a way, in that what was harming my performance when I was not reaching the target score that I knew I could reach was that I was getting bogged down on questions. And I was really struggling with moving on from questions that were not working out for me. And I had to learn to let go of the questions that I was not getting correct. I had to develop a strategy for doing that. But for me, that was the most important thing. And so if you can kind of diagnose what are your stress triggers and focus on those, I think that can be helpful. So it looks like Paloma has her hand up. So I'm going to allow you to talk, Paloma. If you want to unmute yourself, go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can. Hello.
Hi, thank you so much for having access to you and your wisdom. I'm just wondering if there's any advice you can give to someone who's been out of school for 10 years and has like no discipline in like how to study, how to pay attention to the things that work for you or not. So I just decided to jump in and finally get this dream of mine on the road. But I'm honestly like a little bit overwhelmed. Like it just seems such a big world that I'm gonna jump into. I don't know if it makes sense what I'm trying to say, but
it makes sense 100%, Paloma. So yes, you've been out of school for 10 years and you're jumping back in. So when I went back to law school, I'd been out of school for 7 years. So not quite as long as 10 years, but it was still kind of a distant memory for me. And I think what can be helpful, to the extent that you remember the things that worked for you as an undergrad or think back to them, I think that can be helpful. But I think one of the big ways to make sure, well, let me say two things. One is I think having a schedule can be helpful to just get you in the habit and make it so that you're not like having to make decisions about, am I studying now? Am I doing something else now? And then also making sure that you have an environment that is scholastic and conducive to studying. And so I think the way to do that, or one of the ways to do that, is to set aside a place to study and make it your study location. And to make it one that is both like focused and productive. So it's got plenty of light. Probably it's a desk with a chair where you're sitting up rather than lying in bed or something like that, but also one that is comforting. And so, you know, don't just put a desk against a wall and bang your head against the wall, you know, make it nice. Are there, you know, you can put potted plants around it. You can, you know, make sure you're, I don't know, studying with ambient music or something like that. So both a focused and productive area, and then also an area that you are comfortable with. There's lots of other stuff that we can do, but those are my kind of recommendations, at least for that. So thank you for the question, Paloma. All right, I see Brandy has her hand up, so let me call on Brandy. Go ahead, Brandy, if you want to unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can, hello.
Hi, okay, mine is quite a challenge because I don't know what your experience was when you were going to law school, but I will be attending as a part-time student. So I will be juggling work full-time and going to school part-time in the evening. I guess my question is, how do you know when you should probably maybe reschedule your exam date? Right now I'm scheduled for November. I've had to take a couple weeks off in order to handle like a life change, like, you know, buying a new home and relocating and things like that. How do you know like when it's probably you should consider maybe pushing your test date back?
Let me ask you, have you taken the exam already, or will this be your first time?
This will be my first time. I'm scheduled for November, and I'm thinking of pushing back to January just to make sure that I'm ready.
So here I'm going to give you a kind of a non-answer, but I hope it really is an answer, which is that lots of people, myself included, take the LSAT twice. And so I don't know that you necessarily need to postpone even if you're not ready. And so you can take the exam kind of as a dry run to see what it's like and to prepare yourself, and then take it again. If you're taking it for the first time, the LSAC has this, and of course they charge you extra for it because they love to charge for everything. But you can, if you're a first time taker, you can preview your score and cancel after having seen your score. So you might just want to take the exam and decide whether or not to cancel afterward.
Okay, so should I just keep with, because I've been using your study schedule. It's a bit more rigorous for me. I tried to do it, but like I said, holding down a full-time job, I was starting to experience the signs of burnout, like you said. So I've altered it a little bit, getting back in the swing of things, but is the recommendation to just keep plugging away and then take the exam and then take another one maybe in January?
Well, that's the recommendation unless you are going to permanently burn yourself out or do something that's not in line with your mental health. So you might.
No, I'm done with that. I'm done with that. I just need to manage it a little bit different. I've gotten to a place where I can manage things and reconsidering the schedule, but that's good to know. That's good to know.
Okay, well, hopefully that was helpful advice, but I really think that you don't necessarily need to cancel. If you only want to take it once, then you certainly can, but I think that's not necessary. And I think it can be really helpful to take it as a dry run, even if you're not scoring at your target score.
Perfect. That's great advice. Thank you.
My pleasure. All right, we've got, let's see, Sarah has her hand up. So let me allow you to talk, Sarah, and that might be the last one before we move on. But go ahead, Sarah, and unmute yourself if you would like to talk.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Hi, Sarah, I can hear you, yes.
Okay, cool. Hi, everyone. So I was just gonna ask a question on, again, burnout, because we were on that. And I also wanted to say, like, I was in school for like the whole year straight because I took summer courses. So I'm in my burnout as we speak. And I was just wondering if you had like some other points that you can maybe share on the whole how to get out of it, because I'm also in school right now, so like and everything's like online, so like moving and finding a new study space isn't something I can really do at the moment. But I was like wondering if anyone doesn't know, it can be anyone in like the chat, if like you guys have any like other points that would be helpful for someone in a burnout.
Yeah, so I guess a few things I would say. I don't know that I have many points over and above what was on that list, but I do think, and I guess this one is not on there, but I know, and I struggle with this, I don't necessarily do it, but I do think it's helpful, which is to just, which is a practice of gratitude, which is kind of taking stock of the things that actually are great about your life in order to understand and put into perspective the stresses that you are having. And so a lot of people will take the time to just list off the things that they're grateful for. That can be family, that can be friends, things like that. I know that that doesn't necessarily speak immediately to burnout, but I think another way to kind of get in touch with gratitude, and I think I did put this down there, is to treat yourself, is to do nice things for yourself, to just show yourself in kind of like an empirical way that whatever stress that you're going through, you're doing it for a positive reason to improve yourself, and that you deserve the success that you will have at the end of it. I wish I could tell you like, hey, just go take a week off. But it sounds like you're kind of not in a place where you can take a week off. So hopefully that will be helpful for you. And I know that some stuff is coming in the chat box as well.
Branden, may I say something really quickly? Tatiana.
Sure.
Well, I just want to say really quick. First, this meeting, wow, it's really just confirms and reaffirms what I kind of said earlier about how wonderful you and this company is. So I wanted to just say really quick, first of all, or second of all, the comments everyone has made are amazing, and such intelligent, and eloquent people who are intervening here. They already sound like all lawyers to me, so I think that you all just have really confidence. I'm a little bit far from that myself, being an eloquent speaker, however, but working on it. I just want to say also everything that you said, I've tried to take notes as much as quickly as possible as you were speaking. And, I think I just, briefly, I didn't want to really say this, but, I'm currently in my PhD program myself right now. However, I'm very, very interested in, hopefully maybe in the future soon, following this dream also of mine that I have. Eddie, Sarah, so nice. Everyone that spoke, Paloma, the name of my niece, by the way. But anyway, everyone just so nice, and just want to say, please have confidence in yourself. I once had, a lot of doubts about, undergoing this program. And so I don't know if I really have a question other than perhaps, when I've heard people say this is a non-answer. So I'm just kind of wondering what that really, what does that mean? I haven't really thought about that or know what it really means. But thank you for the opportunity.
Sure, my pleasure. And what I mean by non-answer is that I'm going to give you some information that I think is helpful, but may not be a direct answer to the question that you asked, where I think it would be helpful to the topic, but maybe not exactly on point, is the point that I was making. But thank you for that, Tatiana. I appreciate your kind words. And I do think, as I'm looking at the chat box and trying to keep up with it, it seems like there's a lot of great suggestions in there as well. So we could talk about this stuff for a long time, and I know there are some other hands up, but I do have some kind of more practical stuff that I wanted to talk to you guys about. And so let me bring that up, and we will move on to the next part of this presentation. So let me share my screen with you once again. Hold on one moment. Share content, screen, start broadcast. All right, so this was the presentation. before we move on to talking about specifically how to manage stress in the midst of the LSAT, I just want to point out these resources. And this is very much not an exhaustive list of the resources that you could use in order to start your mindfulness path. But these resources, some of them are free, and I think they're very good resources. So there are apps about meditation. So there's Headspace is a very popular one. Calm is also a very popular one. Both of those, I think, you have to pay for. Headspace I got for free being a resident of Los Angeles at one point. I don't know if I still have it, but at one point, residents of Los Angeles got Headspace for free, which is a useful one. This one I just started off with, and I haven't used it a lot, but it's actually really cool. Insight Timer. That one is free, although there are in-app purchases. And let me just show you, I have it, I think here. I have both Headspace and Insight Timer up. But Insight Timer just has a lot of different stuff that will, okay, calling all yogis, there you go. But there's just a bunch of different stuff depending upon your needs and you know, what you like and what you don't like. There's lots of good stuff. There's live meditations that you can join in with. Apparently Giselle Bunkin, is that how you say her name? She does live meditations. But there are guided meditations that will help you practice mindfulness, but there's also just a timer that you can set up and just give yourself, you know, either time to meditate fully or just time to be quiet and make sure that you're, you know, in tune with what you need. So I'm not going to walk you through this whole app. That's not the point of this presentation. But those are the ones that I would check out. Like I said, Headspace and Calm, I think, cost money. Oh, Armani says Audible has free meditation books as well, short 10 minutes. There are also all over YouTube guided meditations. There's like thousands and thousands and thousands of them. And again, you can get the ones that are like just your standard, sit there and focus on your breathing. There are body scan meditations where you basically check in at different points with how you're feeling. But all of them, the point is to just make sure that you are squarely in the moment, not thinking about the past and having regrets, not thinking about the future and having anxiety about it. So that was what I wanted to say about that stuff. Please check it out. Now, we are going to get to the stuff that I really am an expert on. So all of this other stuff, mindfulness, stuff like that, I've dabbled in it, but I probably don't know a whole lot more than you do. But this is the stuff that I do know. And so obviously, you know, dealing with stress generally, being able to study generally is important. But there's also the concern of how do I not let stress horn in on my performance as I am taking an exam? And the idea behind this, behind everything I'm going to say, is that what is incredibly important, and what I've been talking about through this whole presentation, is to be focused on what's in front of you, to be in the moment. And I think it can be very hard to do that on the LSAT with the difficult concepts, with the way things are worded. It can be very difficult to do that. But I think the way that you do that, and I think it works, and you know, we have to tweak it a little bit for the different section types, but is to do what I call active reading. And that means as I am taking the exam, I'm looking at it as an activity. I'm not just passively reading and then hoping that the answer presents itself, that the answer becomes obvious after I've read and the answer becomes obvious. Instead, the LSAT is an activity and you have steps to execute. And I think if you are executing steps rather than just reading passively, then I think it helps keep you in the moment because you have an activity that you're doing. You can't be out of the moment if you are actively engaged with what's in front of you. And so I just like to talk, and I have a couple of examples. We won't necessarily get through all of them. I'd like to talk about how I do active reading. And the way I do active reading is to kind of interrogate what I'm reading. And you don't necessarily have to follow these steps in this order all in a row. But if you are doing this, then you're looking at the exam as, or at least what you're reading, as pieces of a puzzle to put together. I'm picking out those pieces, I'm arranging them, I'm understanding what they mean to each other. And as I'm doing that, I don't have time or the attention to think about what's going wrong with my performance, what's going to go wrong in the future if I don't get the score that I want to, et cetera, et cetera. So active reading, I think that is how you stay in the moment. So with a logical reasoning question, these are the things that I'm going through in order to do active reading on a logical reasoning question. So obviously it's important to identify what is the question type we're doing. So that's one of the tasks that I complete every time I do a question. Every time you do a logical reasoning question, in the stimulus, there's two possibilities. You have an argument or you have a set of facts. And so that's my concern as I'm looking at it. Am I reading an argument? Am I reading a set of facts? There are lots of questions where you basically always have an argument. Strengthen, weaken, error. Most of the questions in logical reasoning have a full argument because they're specifically asking you about an argument. You can't strengthen a set of facts. It would make no sense. You can only strengthen an argument. The question types, like I said, most question types on the LSAT have a full argument. The ones that are likely to have just a set of facts must be true questions, cannot be true questions, paradox questions. Those are the ones that often have just a set of facts. And I think you need to approach it differently and to be looking for different things, whether it's an argument or a set of facts. If it's an argument, then we have an analysis. I'm going to underline the conclusion because I always do that. And on test day, you'll be able to underline. You'll also have 3 highlighter colors. So you can definitely do that. And I think the underlining and the highlighter colors can be really helpful for this active reading stuff. So I underline the conclusion. In order to analyze the argument, I must know what is the support. And so what I do, and I use the yellow color, the yellow highlighter, I highlight the premises. A lot of times there's a conclusion, there are premises, but there's also background. And so it's not just the case that everything in the argument that is not the conclusion is premises. And so that skill, separating premises from background, is important, and you should be doing that. And then finally, especially if I'm dealing with a question type that commonly has a flawed argument, by which I mean errors in reasoning, strengthen, weaken, strengthen with a necessary premise, strengthen with a sufficient premise, those arguments, there's something wrong with them. And so as I'm doing my active reading, what I'm doing is interrogating the stimulus. I'm trying to figure out what is wrong with this thing. And so if I can find one of those common fallacies, there are 33 of them, we have a whole book about it, then I've done the analysis I'm supposed to do. And so this is the activity that I'm engaged in. If it's a set of facts, then I still have a checklist of things that I need to do. Is it diagrammable? Must be true questions, for instance, are often diagrammable. So obviously that's an activity that you can perform and be in the moment rather than just reading it. But even if there's not a full argument, even if it's not diagrammable, there are things that are important to note. Strong statements, especially in must be true questions, are more likely to support a right answer. So you should zero in on them and compare the strength of statements. Also, comparisons, and we'll see how this works. Understanding when things are being compared in a stimulus is important. And then finally, as you are going through the answers, if an answer is describing the stimulus, and a lot of right answer or a lot of question types, the answer describes the stimulus, like in an error in reasoning question, you're being asked to accurately describe what you're reading. Try to map what you're reading onto the stimulus. If it doesn't fit, it is the wrong answer. And again, that's an activity for you to engage in rather than to just be thinking about what's in front of you. So I've got a few examples here. I don't know if we'll get through all of them, but let's take a look at them. And I'll show you what I mean by active reading. So this question says, some potential anti-cancer drugs work by depriving growing tumors of needed blood vessels. The creation of blood vessels is called angiogenesis, and the experimental drugs work by inhibiting this process. The same drugs have been found to prevent obesity in rodents. I'm not seeing an argument here because I'm not seeing a conclusion supported by premises. And as I look at the question type, the statements above, if true, lend the strongest support to which of the following. This is a must-be-true question. And it is very often the case that in must-be-true questions, there is no argument to the stimulus. Instead, there is just a set of facts. And so here is what I am doing with this set of facts, is I'm thinking to myself, first of all, is this diagrammable? Well, I'm not seeing conditional keywords. I'm not seeing statements that would link up in the transitive. So I don't think I'm dealing with a diagrammable stimulus here. So I'm going to put that away, but I'm going to look for strong statements, and I'm also going to look for comparisons. The statements here, I don't think any are very strong. The first one starts with some, which makes it kind of a weak statement. But there is a comparison. And here is the comparison. So we have these drugs, these anti-cancer drugs. They tell us how they work, but they also tell us that they work to prevent obesity in rodents. And so that's something very different, but it is a comparison. I have this medicine. When I give it to humans, what's it do? It helps with cancer. When I give it to rodents, what does it do? It helps them with obesity. And then they tell us how it works. It works by depriving growing tumors of needed blood vessels. So what I'm seeing is that this thing seems to be true across these categories, across this comparison. I have humans who are helped with cancer by this drug. I have rodents who are helped with obesity with this drug, and they tell us what the function is. I'm not sure that I can anticipate an answer choice off of these statements, but I think I have a good idea of what's going on, and I have that comparison. So I would be looking for an answer choice that is supported by that comparison. As I'm going through my answer choices, again, I'm trying to do active reading. So the right answer choice in a must be true question has to be derived from the statements in the stimulus. And so I'm comparing what I'm reading with the statements in the stimulus and asking myself, is this derived from here or is it coming from somewhere else? So let's have a look at the answers, or at least a few of them. This answer makes a comparison, but I think it's a comparison we can't make. The cells in tumors are more similar to structures in fat cells than to other cells in the body. This is where this goes off the rails for me. I'm looking at the stimulus and I'm asking myself, where do I have information about other cells besides fat cells and tumor cells? Those were the only types of things I talked about. So that's the wrong answer. Because we are running out of time, and I know there are questions to get to, I'm not going to look at all of these answer choices. But the right answer, the one that is derived from that comparison, is answer choice C. Fat tissue depends on angiogenesis in order to grow. And this is supported by the stimulus because here's what happened. They told us this drug works, and they told us how it works. It works like this, depriving tumors of needed blood vessels. And then it says, well, hey, it also works on fat as well. Well, if that is the mechanism by which this drug works, then that's how it works on those fat cells as well. So that is the right answer. It's supported by that comparison in the stimulus. Let's maybe do one more logical reasoning question, and then we can move on to the other sections and how to do active reading there. Let's just have a look at this one. So this is a weakened question, which means there's going to be a full argument in the stimulus. And so I'm definitely doing my argument analysis. Where is the conclusion? Where's the support? As opposed to what is the background? Is there a flaw that I see here? And if I have engaged in that process and I have answers, then I can predict the answer choice. Anthony asks, can we get this PowerPoint somewhere? Yoli asks, is there a PDF for this presentation? I do not believe so. Sorry, this is a one-off. Okay, so let's have a look at this. Few, if any, carbonated beverages contain calcium. Some very popular ones, however, contain significant amounts of caffeine, and consuming caffeine causes people to excrete significantly more calcium than they would otherwise. Interestingly, teenagers who drink large amounts of carbonated beverages containing caffeine tend to suffer more broken bones than those who do not. Calcium deficiency can make bones more brittle, of course, so the higher incidence of broken bones in teenagers who consume carbonated beverages with caffeine is probably due primarily to caffeine consumption. Our conclusion is here. The higher incidence of broken bones in teenagers who consume carbonated beverages with caffeine is probably due to caffeine consumption. I think there's a lot of background here. What are the premises, I think, are these. We have teenagers who drink large amounts of carbonated beverages containing caffeine tend to suffer more broken bones than those who do not. And calcium deficiency makes bones more brittle. I want to point out also that there is a comparison here. And even though I know I put that down in the set of facts rather than in the argument portion, I think it's important to make sure we know who we're comparing. We're comparing teenagers who drink large amounts of carbonated beverage to those who do not. Teenagers, We're not talking about anybody besides teenagers. We're talking about teenagers who drink lots of carbonated beverages and teenagers who don't. So as I see this, I'm thinking of a couple of things. This is a causal argument. We're saying that the cause of this broken bone situation is caffeine consumption. Well, when I'm being critical of an argument, when I'm thinking of a flaw, this argument treats correlation as proof of causation. The fact that these two things go together, drinking carbonated beverages and broken bones, does not mean that one causes the other. And so what I always want to do is to be thinking of alternate causes. So that's another way, even though it's not active reading, you're still engaged in the process, where you're thinking about what else besides caffeine might be causing these broken bones. And here's some things I'm thinking about. Maybe it's the carbonation rather than the caffeine. I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I don't know how this stuff works, but that seems reasonable. Part of active reading, to the extent that you can do it, I think, is anticipating an answer choice. We know that this is a weakened question. It's a causal argument, and common answer choices follow common patterns. So a right answer to a weakened question might show an alternate cause. It might show cause without effect. It might show effect without cause. And again, since we're running out of time, I'm just going to go to the right answer. The right answer, well, first of all, let's talk about the popular wrong answer. The popular wrong answer is B. Teenagers engage in the types of activities that carry a high risk of causing broken bones much more often than both older and younger people do. The reason this is wrong is because it's the wrong comparison. We're trying to figure out the difference between teenagers who drink carbonated beverages and those who do not. This is talking about teenagers in general and others. And it's just wrong because of that. The right answer is A. Teenagers who drink large quantities of carbonated beverages containing caffeine tend to drink smaller quantities of calcium-rich beverages than other teenagers do. This makes it sound like it's not necessarily actively drinking the caffeine that's the problem. It's that you're not drinking as much calcium as you would otherwise. And it's an alternate cause. And so what we've done is we've looked at the stimulus, we've identified the pieces of the argument, we figured out what's wrong with it, we've anticipated an answer choice. All of that is a process to be engaged in. Let's talk about how this works just very quickly with the other two sections of the exam. So logic games. It's very easy to look at a logic game and say, what on earth am I looking at? And to just stare in despair at it. And we definitely don't want to do that. And so once again, the way that I address this stuff is I tend to be like interrogating what I'm reading. And so as I'm looking at a logic game, as I'm doing the setup and looking at the rules, I'm kind of going through a checklist in my head that helps me narrow down what I should be doing and especially how to get that set up. And getting the setup is important. Knowing what type of game you're doing is important to do that. So these are the things that I'm thinking about. My kind of top of the line concern as I'm reading is this a linear game? Am I being asked to put things into order? Is it a group game? Am I being asked to put things into groups? Am I being asked to do both, which would be a hybrid game? Or if not, am I being asked to do something else, which would be a Lost Boy game? The vast majority of games that you will see on test day fall under these three: linear game, grouping game, or both. It's also important to note as you're trying to figure out how your setup works. So these are the questions I'm asking myself, and I'm scouring the setup to try to find this stuff. How many variables are there? Do all of them have to be used? Can any of them be used more than once? These things are important bits to pull out of the setup. As I'm creating my setup, can the slots be placed? So for instance, if you're doing a group game, sometimes they'll tell you something like, there are 2 groups and each has 3 members. Well, in that case, you can put all 3 slots in. But sometimes they'll tell you there are 2 groups, each has at least 1 member. And there are still other slots to be distributed. So I have to know that, and I'm checking the prompt to make sure that I do know that. And then, and this is especially important, as I'm reading the rules, what rules share variables? That makes it much easier for me to make deductions to see where variables show up in multiple rules. So I have a real LSAT game here. Let's just read through the setup really quickly and we'll answer these questions. So this was from a fairly recent LSAT, I think a couple of years ago. In creating a soup recipe, a chef is deciding which of 7 vegetables, garlic, jalapeno, kale, onion, potato, tomato, and yam, to include among the ingredients. The chef has decided that the vegetables she includes will be added one at a time to a pot of liquid ingredients. Each vegetable will be added only once, subject to the following conditions. So far, I think we can answer some of these questions. Linear, group, or both? I see both. So let's say linear, and let's make pink group. Here tells me that this is a grouping game. Which of 7 variables to include? So that's telling me that there is an in group and an out group. In group is in the soup, out group is out of the soup. But there's also a linear portion. The chef has decided that the vegetables she includes will be added one at a time. So now I know I'm doing a hybrid game. And my setup is going to have to reflect both that there is a group portion to this and a linear portion. How many variables are there? Well, there are 7. And they give it to us right here. So I don't really need to. There are 7 variables. So I've answered that question. But this is important. Do all of them have to be used? Well, no. This is an in and out game. She's deciding which will be used. So it's entirely possible some of them are used and some of them are not. So I've answered that question. Can any of them be used more than once? It doesn't look like it. We're either going to put it in and it will be in a particular order, or we're not. And then finally, can the slots be placed? Well, so far it doesn't look like it. It just says which of 7 variables. So I don't know how many are getting in. I don't know how many are out. But as I read further, I may be able to figure that out. And in fact, we'll be able to figure out something like that. So we've read the setup, now let's look at the rules. If jalapeno is an ingredient, it must either be added first or last. If jalapeno is an ingredient, yam must not be an ingredient. Either potato is an ingredient or yam is an ingredient, but not both. Garlic, kale, onion, and tomato must be ingredients. Onion must be added at some time before garlic, and garlic must be added at some time before both kale and tomato. So as I'm determining, can the slots be placed, there's actually a lot of important information here. Well, they tell us garlic, kale, onion, and tomato must be ingredients. And so what that's telling me is that there's at least 4 slots in the in group. If all of those must be placed, then I must have slots for them. So that's a good start. That's helping me out. There are a couple of others that I think are important. Like this next rule says, if jalapeno is an ingredient, then yam must not be an ingredient. That looks like this. If J is in, then Y is out. Contrapositive is if Y is in, J is out. This is a cannot be together rule. And what that means is that at least one of these guys is going to have to be out, J or Y. And so this information, even though it doesn't look like it, is actually telling me about placing slots. It's placing a slot in the out group. This one too, either potato is an ingredient or yam is an ingredient, but not both. The fact that we cannot have both of them in is once again putting another slot in the out group. If we can't have both of them in, that means at least one of them is going to have to be out. Potato or yam. And so that all ends up being very helpful, and it helps me build my setup. And again, I've got a checklist of things I need to learn from the stimulus, and I'm executing on that checklist as I'm going through it. All right, one last bit of information about staying in the moment, and this one I think is the hardest to stay in the moment, which is reading comprehension. It is really easy to just get bored and want to check out with reading comprehension. But I look at reading comprehension like logical reasoning on a grand scale, which is that there are pieces of arguments to be put together. And in fact, there are generally, or at least often, multiple arguments. And so as I'm doing active reading, at each point in my passage, I'm saying, okay, what am I reading and how does it fit into the argument structure? Because that's what's most important. And so these are the steps that I'm taking as I am reading a reading comp passage. And let me just run through them quickly and then we'll see how it works on this passage. Usually, a passage begins with background. It's some context that's important for you to understand the arguments coming at you, but it is not yet the argument itself. But often as you're reading the background, you can see that a particular structure is shaping up. There are common things that authors of passages on the LSAT argue for. So as I'm reading the background, if I see one of these things, I can anticipate what's coming. A lot of times they'll tell you about the traditional view. Well, if you're learning about a traditional view in the background, there's a great chance that the argument is going to come in, that the author is going to come in and say, well, actually, the traditional view is wrong. And so that's what I'm anticipating, that the author is going to dispute the traditional view. Another very common way a passage gets started is that there is a problem to be solved. The author will tell us that, I don't know, crime is soaring in this country, or, poverty is out of control, or something like that. And when you see one of those things, you can bet that the author is going to propose a solution. And that's probably going to be the main conclusion, the author's solution to the problem. Often in science passages, there's some weird, unexplained phenomenon. They love the word phenomenon. And if you see that there's some weird mystery that we don't understand, you can anticipate that the author is going to propose a hypothesis to explain that. And the hypothesis is likely the main conclusion. Each one of these is showing me what my conclusion is likely to look like. And that's always the most important part of an argument, is the conclusion. Once I get past that background, now I'm looking for the arguments. The most important pieces of the arguments, and let me take a step back. I think what you're being asked to do in a reading comp passage, or what you're being tested on, is your ability to read a judicial opinion, which is going to be the vast majority of your readings in law school. And the way a judicial opinion works is that the judge writes out the arguments of plaintiff and defendant in a particular issue, critiques those arguments, and decides who is right and who is wrong. And so generally with a reading comp passage, even though most of them have nothing to do with the law, you're still finding that structure. Arguments are being laid out, they're being critiqued, and very often the author is deciding what's good and what's bad. So those are the things I'm anticipating. I need to pick those pieces up. Usually the first conclusion comes around the end of the first paragraph or the beginning of the second paragraph after that background. And I underline that. I use yellow to highlight support for arguments. I use pink to highlight criticisms and attitude. Just like in must be true questions and logical reasoning, comparisons are important. In reading comp, you'll often get a question from a definition or a comparison. I tag those in orange. And then finally, by the time you get to the end of the passage, you must know which conclusion, if any, the author endorses, because the author's conclusion is the main point. Paloma asks, can we highlight on the flex? Yes. You cannot highlight on, so LSATMax only offers exams in flex format on our website, not on the app, and we don't have the highlighting function yet on our website. But on the real LSAT-flex, you will be able to highlight. If you do LSAT questions on the LSATMax app, you can highlight. You can also get practice at LawHub. If you've signed up with LSAC, go to lawhub.lsac.org, I think it is, and you can take practice exams using their format. Tasneem asks, how should we grade our practice flex exams? When you're done with it, you should get a button that will ask you to grade it, ask you if you want to grade it. If you're taking an exam from LawHub or somewhere else, then what you should do is to get since it's only 3 sections rather than 4, get the conversion chart from when that LSAT was released. Whatever percentage of questions correct would get you a particular score on a regular LSAT. The same or a similar percentage of questions correct on an LSAT Flex will get you the same score. So if you got 90% on a regular LSAT, that would get you about a 170. If you get 90% on an LSAT Flex, that should give you about a 170. I see more questions coming in. Let me just run through this because we are running out of time and I do want to take your questions. This is one of the 2 passages from a paired passage, and I'll just show you how I would be using this active reading thing in order to do this. So in 1940, Benjamin Lee Whorf seduced a whole generation into believing that our mother tongue restricts what we are able to think. In particular, Whorf announced, Hopi and English impose different pictures of reality on their speakers, impeding mutual understanding. Eventually, it transpired that there had never actually been any evidence to support his fantastic claims. So here I'm seeing a couple of things. I'm seeing what I think would be a traditional view, but I also see really like strong, almost snarky attitude about it. Benjamin Lee Whorf seduced people. These claims are fantastic. But here is what the claim is. This is the original point of view. Our mother tongue restricts what we are able to think. And there is an alleged example of this, and an example is a premise. Hopi and English impose different pictures of reality on their speakers, impending mutual understanding. So there's a lot going on there. There's a traditional view, which I think is a conclusion. There is some support for it, and the author attacks it. So this is disputation. If we stopped here, this would probably be the author's conclusion. But what we are going to see in the next paragraph is that the author goes on to explain how language really affects how we think. Worf's main mistake was to assume that our mother tongue prevents us from being able to think certain thoughts. New research suggests that in reality, its influence consists in what it obliges us to think about. So I have a criticism. Worf made a mistake. He thought it commanded us from thinking. There is new research which shows what is really going on. In reality, its influence consists in what it obliges us to think about. So the author is saying, no, Worf. It's not that it forces you, that it stops you from thinking certain things. Instead, it forces you to think certain things. And now I think we're going to get some support for this. German, for example, forces me to designate my neighbor as male. I'm not going to try to pronounce either of these. I don't speak German, or female. That is an example. Furthermore, grammatical genders can shape the feelings and associations that speakers have towards the objects around them. In the 1990s, psychologists compared associations that speakers of German and Spanish make. There are many inanimate nouns whose genders in the two languages are reversed. A German bridge is feminine, for instance, but el puente is masculine in Spanish, and the same goes for clocks and violins. When the speakers were asked about the characteristics of various objects, Spanish speakers deemed bridges, clocks, and violins to have stereotypically masculine properties like strength, but Germans tended to think of them as more slender or elegant, with objects like mountains or chairs, which are he in German, but she in Spanish. The effect was reversed. So this, we have an experiment, but we get what I think is the most important part of it down here, which is that the way an item is gendered, rather than the actual features of that item, force us to think in certain ways about them. And all of that stuff, those experiments, I think support the idea that the main influence of language is what it obliges us to think about, not what it prevents us from thinking about. So that is how I would do active reading with this passage. I'm just making sure that I'm finding all the pieces of the passage, and I'm looking at it as a puzzle to put together. It's an activity. It's not just something for me to passively receive. So Law Hub has the same flex format. Yes, Law Hub has the flex format. Armani says no. I think it's pretty close. I've seen it. It should have the same format. Okay. That was the information I wanted to give you. And again, this is about being focused on what's in front of you instead of thinking about what gives you stress and anxiety. Let me unshare my screen, and I am going to answer your questions to the best of my ability. So Mike asks, does LSATMax give explanations of questions wrong or right after a test? Yeah, so as you review your performance, most of the questions, like I said, there are those message boards, and if people have asked questions about them, there will definitely be an explanation. There are also, for a lot, but not all of the questions, there are video explanations that we have created for the questions as well. So let me have a look at these questions in the Q&A box, and I will answer them as they came in. What are some strategies to stay calm the day of the test and to keep from getting overwhelmed? So I think that active reading stuff is very important. I know I already told you about that, so I will not belabor it. But some other things that I think are important, what I did, what was helpful for me was, I actually did a few logical reasoning questions to get my brain warmed up before I took the test. So I think that can be helpful. Also, these mindfulness exercises, like taking deep breaths and stuff like that, that you'll learn from some of the resources I talked about, those are things that you can do at any time. You can take 15 seconds out of a section to take 3 or 4 deep breaths. And I know that may sound like it's not up to the challenge, but a few deep breaths can definitely change things. If he asks some questions I had at the end, what was your study methods? How long did you study for? How did you measure your progress? So I started studying, oh my God, you're going to find out how old I am now. The first time I took the LSAT was the December 2005. And I started studying in October of 2005. I didn't get the score I wanted on the December 2005 exam. I took probably a month off maybe, and then I studied again all the way through the June exam. So I studied for 6 months at least, probably a little bit more. I took the exam twice. What was really important for me, the way that I made my progress was, like I was talking about before, so I came into the LSAT, I was a philosophy major, which really I think helped me kind of have a leg up on this stuff. So for me, it wasn't as much about learning the concepts as it was about learning test mechanics. And so for me, a lot of it was taking lots of practice exams and reviewing my performance and thinking about how do I take the test? What are my strengths and weaknesses? And how can I play to my strengths? And how can I, block and tackle when it comes to my weaknesses? Oh gosh, boy, this is a hard question. How do you identify toxic people if they are close to you? Wendy, I think that probably somewhere deep down inside, your heart or your subconscious or whatever you want to call it has identified those people already. If there are people where thinking about them gives you any kind of stress rather than relieving stress, or at least being neutral, then probably it is a toxic person. But anybody who wants you to give up well, here's a rule that I've heard, and I'm paraphrasing this, so I don't know if it's right, but anybody who puts their wants over your needs is a toxic person, because needs are more important than wants. And there are people out there who will put their wants over your needs. Those people are no good. Wendy asks, how do you create a study schedule when you work full time? Well, I think what is important is to work out the number of hours that you're going to have. And you can get started, like I said, with LSATMax, we'll give you a study schedule. And basically what you need to do is you need to complete the modules in the course. You can do them out of order, and sometimes I depending on a student's need, I'll help them change up the order of the modules. But at some point, you're going to have to fit those modules into your life. And so depending upon how much time you can put in, those modules need to be completed. And so if you can only do like an hour a day of studying, then it's going to take you a long time to get through that 200 hours of studying. If you can do more, then you can do more. I know that's not a perfect answer. It may not even be a good answer, but it's what I've got. Yoli is asking a question that I think I can answer much more easily. Branden, when do you know to let go of a question when you are not getting it? So I had a real problem with this, which is I would know that I wasn't getting a question because I would be really frustrated with it, and I would still keep working on it. And then the time would run out on the section, and I would throw my book against the wall and scream. And so the way that I forced myself to move on is this. I developed a system, and it's not groundbreaking or anything, but the basic idea was that, and I think you can apply it, you can tweak this to apply it to the other sections, but when it comes to logical reasoning, here was how it worked. I would give myself exactly 2 passes at the stimulus and exactly 2 passes at the answer choices. And if by the time I had gotten through my second pass of the answer choices, I did not have the answer, then my system required me to move on. And so it wasn't about me making this kind of like subjective judgment. Am I getting it? Is it worth a little bit more time? I just had that system. And by the time I'd seen the answer choices the second time around, when I got down to E, if I still didn't have the answer, I would move on. I think this answers this same question. So the question is also from Yoli. If you feel like you are stuck, you don't know why you are stuck, and it stresses you out, what should one do to get out of this? If you're talking about being stuck on a particular question, then I think that system I was talking about is a great way to do it. Give yourself a maximum of 2 passes at the stimulus and 2 passes at the answers, and then regardless of how you feel, it doesn't matter how you feel, just move on. Let's see. Oh, Yoli asked, regarding the TestMax, is there a way to use highlighting option on Google Chrome while practicing through the LSATMax website? I don't believe so. We're working on highlighting, and I would assume it would be the same whether you're using Google Chrome or like a regular laptop or desktop. Currently, you can't do that. Okay, I think that question has been answered. I'll try to answer this question quickly. Any advice for improving on timing, especially for the reading comp section? That is my biggest issue. I think there's actually a lot you can do on timing. And I think at some point in the past, we actually had a presentation on managing time on the different sections on the LSAT. But unfortunately, what I would say is that I think the section with the least you can do to manage your time is reading comprehension, because there's just no way to make it so that it's easy to read 4 passages and answer 27 questions in 35 minutes. There are some ways that you can prioritize. I think tagging, like I was talking about, I have that tagging system. The idea behind tagging is that if you have tagged a passage in a way that's useful, then by the time you get to the questions, you should have the passage color-coded in a way that you can go back and find the answers to questions without rereading large tracts of the passage. So I think tagging efficiently and effectively is important. This is the one section of the LSAT where often I recommend doing the harder stuff first. So usually the last 2 passages are harder than the first 2. And because reading comp is so mentally exhausting, sometimes, or at least for some people, I think it can be better to start off with the difficult passages. That way you're not crunched and exhausted on difficult passages when you get to the end of the section. Instead, you've already done the difficult passages and the easier stuff is there. Let's see. Ron asked, do you have any advice on procrastination? I am not meeting my goals each day on my study schedule, and I am now about a month behind. Yeah, procrastination is a tough one. And procrastination, I think, when I was talking about avoidance, I think procrastination is just another way of saying I am engaged in avoidant behavior right now. And so I don't know that I have something specific to stop you from procrastinating. I know people will say, hey, just do it. And that's really not a valuable thing to say, because I think they call it like executive function control or something like that. You know, there are people who have real issues with getting the process started. The thing that I would say is, I think the best way to address procrastination, or at least one way that works on procrastination, is to cut things up into little chunks and just give yourself small goals to accomplish. Like if I say, okay, I'm going to sit down and for the next 25 minutes, I'm going to do, 10 logical reasoning questions. That is some kind of progress. And so you will have done something. And I do think it's helpful to just kind of break the dam, because the more you procrastinate, the more things pile up, the more anxious you get about them. And it seems like a higher and higher mountain to climb. And ultimately, it's just difficult to start climbing the mountain. So as much as you can, divide things up into small chunks. And I think hopefully that will be helpful. Is it possible to do the last 2 questions first when taking the lsat-flex? Alicia, I'm assuming you're talking about reading comprehension. Yes. If you look down at the bottom when you're taking an LSAT or an lsat-flex, no matter what, there's the question numbers at the bottom. And you can just navigate through the different question numbers. So if you want to go to the 4th passage and it starts at question 20, then you can just click on that question and it should take you there. So yes, you can do that. You can choose the order. All right, let me look at the chat box and see if anything else came in. All right, I think we've gotten to most of the questions. A lot went into the chat box. I'm sorry if I missed some of them. Here's another one came in. Anthony asked, what happens if you join the class in the middle of the course? For instance, I was looking to take the November test, but I purchased the course toward the end of August when I found out about LSATMax. So we build in about 2 months of practice and review at the end of the course. And I think you can kind of abbreviate that portion of the course. So 2 months of practice and review is a lot, but it's what we feel like is going to make you maximally prepared for test day. So I do think that you can kind of the first 2 months of the exam is making your way through the course. I think if you're, getting done with the course with like a month left before the exam, then I think you should be fine. And the November test, I think, comes in the second week of November, meaning if you can get through the course in like the first week of October, which depending upon your commitments may or may not be realizable, then I think you can still be on track to finish the course. And unfortunately, I know there are more questions, but we are at 1:30, and so I am out of time. There were a few questions left. I tried to get to all of them. I hope that I have answered most of your questions, and I hope this presentation was useful for you guys, but I'm going to have to let you guys go now. What I would like to do is to wish you not only the best of luck on the exam and in law school, but I would like to wish you, in the spirit of today's presentation, peace and prosperity. So take care of yourself. You have studied hard already. You will continue to study hard, especially if you're taking the October LSAT. I understand that you're stressed out right now. But please rely upon each other. I was really impressed with what I was seeing in the chat box, and I think you guys have connected, and I'm super excited for you. So having said all of that, let me just thank you all, and once again wish you the best. And take care and show up next time for our next presentation, which will be something else that hopefully is very, very useful to you. Bye-bye. Take care.